economic development activities. Not far away from that land are 2 roadside electronic billboard monuments that bring in advertising revenue, and Little Beach Harvest that recently opened the First Nation-owned marijuana dispensary on Shinnecock territory, and other developments are on the table. There are a lot of questions about the future, and thankfully we have this group of panelists to provide some answers, and I'd like to introduce them now. Joining us are Bianca Collins, who is a council member with the Shinnecock Nation Council of Trustees. Thank you, Bianca. Bryan Polite, who is the chairman of the Shinnecock Nation Council of Trustees. Thank you, Bryan. Southampton Town Supervisor Maria Moore. Thank you, Maria. Southampton Town Councilwoman Cyndi McNamara. Thank you, Cyndi. And New York State Assemblyman Fred Thiele. Thank you, Fred. Just before we get started, I want to mention that this is meant to be a conversation with all of you as well. So Bill, our managing editor, will have a microphone that he can bring around the room. If you have any questions or comments, just flag down our moderator and we'll come around to your seat. So with that, I'm going to introduce the moderator for today's event, the executive editor of the Express News Group, Joe Shaw. Joe?
Thank you. This is an exciting event. I feel like this is one that's literally torn from the headlines, very timely. There's a lot to talk about today, and it's always my pleasure when we do topics that are related to the Shinnecock Nation. I think it's very important that we continue a dialogue about everything that goes on with the nation. They're such an important part of our community. When I got here 25 years ago, one of the first things I heard was that the press and the Shinnecock Nation did not have a very good relationship. And over 25 years with the press and now with the Express News Group, I really have tried to make it a mission to talk about issues that are important to the Shinnecock Nation and to try and bridge the gap between the nation and the rest of the community. That's an ongoing fight. I think it's something we have to continue to work on, but I think there's a lot to do, and I really appreciate the representation here today to have these conversations. I think they're very healthy to have. Having everybody in one room and talking things through is what the Express sessions are all about. We got a lot to talk about today, so we'll start with that. So let me run down the way this works. I'm going to give each of the panelists a chance to speak very briefly, just so you get to hear them and they can introduce themselves a little bit. After that, this becomes a conversation. The crowd is invited to participate. You should ask questions, you can make statements. The same is true of the panelists. If you have something to say, please let me know, try and catch my eye, and we'll get you in. There's no waiting for your turn or anything after the first time we go through the panel here. So I'm looking forward to having a lively conversation. So Bianca, let me ask you first. I think it's fair to say this is a new era for the Shinnecock Nation when it comes to economic development. How is that being received among tribal members? Is everybody very supportive of what's happening?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bianca Collins. I'm a council member for the Shinnecock Nation. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you again for inviting us. I would say that yes, the majority of our community is very much supportive of this. I think that we have a very aligned view and vision for what we want to see happen within our community, and there is just a general understanding of what that would entail, especially economic development projects, such as the gas station, such as our new cannabis dispensary, and the monuments that are on 27. So I think that, just overall, our community members, we talk about this on a daily basis. This isn't a new conversation that we've had. We've been having this conversation throughout generations about how we can move our community forward, how we can make improvements, necessary improvements to our community. So these are conversations that we have with our community members on a daily basis. So there's very much an understanding of why there is such a necessity for these projects to move forward, and our community members are very supportive of them.
Has it brought new energy?
There's certainly a lot of excitement because in all of the projects that we have going on, we are trying to also empower our tribal members to, include their own creative visions in all of our planning. Even for the gas station plaza, we had a contest for the architectural vision. So actually one of our tribal members won the contest, and now it's being designed after their design that they provided us. And we have a lot of our tribal members that have started their own consulting companies to work within our cannabis dispensary, also to provide branding for our LBH line. And there are a lot of entrepreneurs within our community that we're trying to empower and be a part of this process as well.
Bryan, you talked before about planting seeds as being part of what you want to do, and that's sort of an example of that, I'm guessing, is that it creates more opportunities for tribe members to do things. I wonder if you can put this into some historical context. The economic development things that you're accomplishing now, just put into some context about how the tribe has tried to do some things in the past.
Sure, thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk to the Southampton community. I want to thank the Supervisor, Ms. Maria Moore, and Councilwoman Cyndi McNamara, and also Assemblyman Bryan Thiele. I think it's hugely important for the Shinnecock Indian Nation to have this government-to-government relationship. We've had that government-to-government relationship that predates the United States government and goes all the way back to the Crown. So it is hugely important for us to have these open dialogues. In historical context, and I bring up the Crown in 1640, and I always go back to that, as a starting date where this relationship between the Shinnecock people and descendants of the Southampton town members, there's families that go way back to, I believe, 1640 as well. And it's important to put it into those contexts because this isn't new. Shinnecock trying to better themselves. If you are a historian or like to read about the history of Southampton town, you will always see cases where the Shinnecock people have tried to do something economically and have gotten thwarted over the years, sued, land has been taken, railroads have been built, golf courses have been built, and economic development has sprung up all around us. We have been trying for generations to improve our lives by economic self-sustainability. Recently, we've had the means to actually go forward and the wherewithal to try to get some of these across the finish line. And I think the relationship is getting better than it was 20 years ago when the Southampton town attorney basically was in court saying that we're not a tribe. Those days, I believe, are long gone, and I appreciate this town board and the past town board for reaching out and trying to bridge that gap with dialogue. But I also think it's important to not put on blinders as a community when we live around extreme excess when it comes to economic development. The Southampton town has grown leaps and bounds. I graduated in 2001 and Cooper's Farm Road used to be farms. We could walk across and go to 7-Eleven from the movie theaters. That's no longer the case. There's mansions everywhere, there's condos, there's a golf course. So I think putting things into context on what Shinnecock is doing, it's also important to see what has popped up around us over the generations, especially in the last 20 years, which I think, again, as a Southampton town member as well, has just been overboard, if you ask me. So I do, want to talk about our economic development, but put it into the context of what the Southampton town's economic development has been over the last 24 years as well.
Maria, you're town supervisor for about 2 months. You've arrived at town hall just recently. So how high up the list of priorities was it to develop this kind of dialogue immediately with the Shinnecock Nation with everything that's happening? How important was that to you when you were elected?
Well, thank you, Joe. When I was campaigning, some of the other candidates and I went to the nation and we met with the tribal council and we wanted to introduce ourselves and we told them at that time that it was important for us to establish a relationship and we wanted to develop trust. And so this is just another step forward of having this open dialogue. And it was very important for, I think, the town for when Chairman Polite and Ms. Collins came to one of the last work sessions, and they gave a presentation and a very, heartfelt explanation of why the economic development is so important to the nation.
Okay, Cyndi McNamara, when you have these conversations with the Shinnecock Nation about things that are happening, sometimes you have to disagree as well, right? You've sort of taken the lead on that. You've been a critical voice about, for instance, the proposal for the travel plaza. We're going to get deeply into that here in a few minutes. But I wonder if you want to talk about that, about your approach to how, as a town official, you want to contribute to this conversation.
So I met with Chairman Polite and members of the council, and we had a dialogue, and I think it is very important that we understand their history and we understand their part in our town. And that, you know, we come to a place where we can be working together, but also understand that we're not gonna agree on everything. We have a duty as you know, members of the town board to uphold, you know, local zoning, local codes. And I don't think anybody on our board has the appetite where we want to sue the tribe. I don't think anybody wants to do that. But I do think there is this question that remains unanswered, that, you know, what can happen at the Westwoods property? And I know that the nation believes that they have answered that question. We, you know, we may differ on what we think is allowable there, but I don't think anybody agrees that Newtown Road is an accessible option for a travel plaza. I don't think it makes financial sense from the nation's perspective. I know it doesn't make sense for, you know, our local communities. And there is this disconnect, but we do have to work together. And like I spoke to the chairman at our meeting in January, we do have this disconnect. And I think a lot of it is a lot of people, you know, I grew up here, right? And I know that there has been a history of, you know, things that were said against tribal members and perspectives and you know, in all honesty, it's you know, they've been oppressed, and we have to understand that, but we also have to work forward and understand that we all want to work together, and to do that, there needs to be an ongoing dialogue. And we need to work together, and we need to make sure that, you know, if there's town resources we can provide to make sure this is done in the most environmentally, you know, sensitive way, if we can, you know, work to make sure that the neighbors are affected to the minimal extent, then we need to work together on that. But I also think we do need a clear answer as to what our duty is as far as local zoning goes. And I don't think there is a clear answer on that yet. And I think that, you know, if the state needs to go forward with the litigation on the monuments, I think a answer on that will be helpful for all of us to understand where we're at as far as at least where the state stands in all of this. And, you know, but I was honest about it, and we can't be held hostage and say, if the state doesn't grant us this, then Newtown is getting it, because it's just not a viable option in our minds.
We'll circle back and talk about that quite a bit here. Assemblyman Fred Thiele, I'll introduce you one more time by saying this is your last year in office, so I expect extra candor from you today.
Are you saying that I haven't always been candid?
You've been pretty good, but I want it up another level now, since you don't have to worry about re-election. So sadly, Fred has been called to Albany today and has to leave early at about 1 o'clock, so we don't have you very long, so I want to dive right in. So skipping past your introduction, I'd like to talk about the issues about the travel plaza, and I think all sides agree, and I think I'm speaking for everyone at the table. Everybody believes that an entrance ramp from Sunrise Highway would be the most beneficial for a project like a gas station, a tax-free gas station, a travel plaza on that site off of Sunrise Highway. The state hasn't really been willing to even have that conversation with the nation. Can you talk about what the issues are that are holding up this conversation, and where do we go from here?
Sure, and first of all, my apologies for leaving early. It is budget time in Albany, and we're putting together one house budget bills. In fact, I think everybody on this panel has asked me for something in the budget. So there's a rule in Albany, you know, if you're not at the table for the budget talks, you might end up on the menu. So I need to go do that. But to address, you know, the question, I mean, I think the one thing everybody can agree upon, that is if the travel plaza is there, it makes absolutely no sense from any planning or community perspective to use Newtown Lane. It doesn't make sense. Probably not economically viable either to expect people are going to get off the highway and go through that circuitous route. So the issue really is access onto Sunrise Highway. Without prejudging the project at all, I think we all can agree on that. So, you know, it has been very frustrating, and, you know, in dealing with the leadership of the Shinnecock Nation with Bryan and Bianca and their predecessors, you know, the last meeting we had with regard to Sunrise Highway and the Westwoods property, I think was probably 5 years ago. And, you know, it was an initial discussion. And since then, there was the issue with the billboards, the electronic signs, and that has resulted in litigation. And, you know, the Department of Transportation has basically said, you know, we can't talk about that because there's litigation. And
You can't talk about the access road because of the
litigation with regard to the billboards, which I don't really buy, to be honest with you. Are there some issues that intersect between the two? Yes, but I think that shouldn't result in not having a conversation about the planning issues and the traffic safety issues that result from this. So since then, and you know, you've gotten the quotes. Basically, DOT says they won't talk to you about it. It's been very hard to get a meeting with the DOT to really discuss this. So I think that, you know, the best access from a planning perspective is on the Sunrise Highway. I think that the Shinnecock Nation is deserving of an answer on that question. One of my recommendations to Bryan, and I know they're pursuing it, is file the application. They have to, if you file the application for a highway work permit, the state has to respond to that application in a timely fashion. And while we're at it, you know, that this litigation's been around for many years with regard to the billboards now. In preliminary decisions on preliminary injunctions, the state got their hands smacked pretty good in those decisions. You know, one of the things you have to show is the likelihood of success on the merits. The judge said probably not. So this needs to be, both of these issues need to be resolved, and they need to be resolved in a timely fashion. And whether we're talking about, you know, the town of Southampton and the Shinnecocks, or we're talking about the state of New York or the DOT and the Shinnecocks, you know, there's, from my days as being a town supervisor, when I used to negotiate labor contracts, there's always that saying that the best agreement is a negotiated agreement, where everybody, you know, has their issues addressed, as opposed to letting it go to litigation. So, you know, my recommendation for everybody on all of these things is people should be talking, and we should be getting a resolution to this. You know, the one last thing I'll say, because I think it was in your question somewhere, is where does that litigation stand? And Bryan probably knows it better than I do, but I did ask for the Attorney General's office for an update. As I understand it, everything is submitted to the appellate division, which is, we're in the second department, and the last correspondence, I think, was in January about getting this case on the calendar for argument and a decision. So that's where that case is. That could still take months. The appellate division, which used to be very efficient, really fell behind during the pandemic. This case and many cases have been you know, bogged down for quite some time. So that's kind of I think the overview anyway, at least from my perspective.
So Bryan, I don't want to get bogged down too much here, because this can very easily turn into a long conversation about these battles. But let's talk briefly about the monuments and the lawsuit. So that is because the tribe built the monuments with the understanding that it was tribal land, and you felt that you didn't need permission from the state to do that.
Correct. So historical context is important. Sunrise Highway was put through our Westwoods property illegally in 1958 with an easement that the state took illegally. Therefore, when we built the signs, it wasn't just to garner economic development and also put up a monument with our seal 65 feet in the air, giving Shinnecock's pride when they traversed their ancestral land. It was also to show New York State that, yes, this is our land. We have never agreed that this highway be put across our land, and we do not recognize your right of way. And that is the basis of the case currently. And as Assemblyman Thiele said, in the denial of the preliminary injunction, Judge Berlin, who was the judge, went in on that fact that it's probably not going to be in the state's favor continuing this case, and they're probably not going to win because there are really complicated Indian law. One of them is any land taken from Native Americans or sold has to be approved by Congress. It's called the Non-Intercourse Act. So obviously in 1958, when they took the illegal easement, they did not get the approval from Congress. They didn't get the approval from us. So our position is, and always will be, that Sunrise Highway is on our land, and we do not recognize the state's authority to tell us what to do on that property.
And again, we can get bogged down talking about Westwoods, but describe the fact that the Westwoods property is different from Shinnecock territory just outside the village.
It's really not, and I think we did a good job, especially Ms. Thiele, who's an amazing researcher for us and a tribal attorney. She gave the history of Westwoods. So we said this at the meeting. Westwoods, the reason why we call it Westwoods is because we used to go there and collect timber. It's also the point right there next to Canoe Place. Before there was a canal, it was the shortest, it was an isthmus. So we would take our canoes from Shinnecock into Peconic. And one of the big things about the Shinnecock people are we are a people of the water. So accessing Shinnecock to Peconic through that isthmus right there was hugely important for us, not only for our economic needs, also for our travel and our culture to traverse the entirety of the eastern seaboard, going north as far as Maine, because all Algonquins on the East Coast are family to us, and that's how we have our ancient trade routes. So that land over there is hugely important. I would say it's just as important, if not more important historically, than the current land that we're currently on, which was considered swampland back in the 1700s when we were, the 1800s when we were over at what we call the Neck. So Westwoods is not different. It's our sovereign territory, and it's hugely culturally relevant to us because of the access to Peconic Bay and because of the timber that we used to collect there.
So Fred, I'll ask you then to just, if you can, with the understanding that you're not necessarily endorsing this, what's the state's position been on Westwoods legally, and what have the courts said so far?
Well, I don't think the state has a position on Westwoods. I think that is more, it's been historically, it's been an issue between the town and the nation about authority, land use authority and zoning authority. And it's not new. I remember I was the town attorney in 1984. The town was doing a comprehensive plan. And I remember sitting across the table from Marguerite Smith and having a discussion about what the town comprehensive plan should do with regard to Westwoods. And here I am 40 years later, and here's Marguerite Smith here 40 years later, and it's still an issue. All right? So, but I think, the state's role here, I think, is largely relates to Sunrise Highway and that and access onto that road. And I think the other issues are local issues. I think they should remain local issues. I had a big fight with the governor last year when the state tried to get involved with housing and local land use and overriding it. And I think that's an issue that the state's interest is in the highway, and we should stay out of the rest of it and let it get resolved here locally.
Maria, I wonder if you have a position on the town's involvement with Westwoods. Where are you starting from when you have these conversations about Westwoods? Do you believe the town has the legal right to manage what goes on up there, that has a say in that, or is it sovereign territory?
Well, we've been trying to find a definitive answer to that, and I know the nation has their position, but there doesn't seem to be an answer just yet. And with respect to the lawsuit, perhaps that will tell us. But in the meantime, I think the best way to proceed would be to work together and I know that Chairman Polite said there's issues with coming into working with the town's planning board, but I think that would be beneficial to everybody, and if, avail themselves of the expertise and talk about, setbacks and come to an agreement in that way, either way. I mean, if the state determines that the nation is subject to local zoning and planning rules, then comply. And if the decision is that they're not, well, it's no harm, because we've just worked together to collaborate to come up with a mutually beneficial solution.
Bianca, I'm curious, we've had the conversation about let's focus in on the travel plaza. The idea of not having access to that site from Sunrise Highway, how does that affect that project? Does the project still go forward if you don't have access from Sunrise Highway? What's the tribal council's feeling about it?
I would say that the council and the general council, which is, the population of our Shinnecock Nation, has a general consensus that this project is moving forward. This is something that we take great pride in. Obviously, if we don't have the access from Sunrise Highway, it's going to impact our business when that project is completed. And ideally, we want the access to come from the highway, but it's, when we have the state being unwilling to work with us, which is, again, nothing new, nothing that is new to us. It's very difficult for us to say we're going to halt any of our economic development projects, again, because local or state governments are unwilling to work with the Shinnecock Nation and acknowledge our sovereign territory and our sovereign rights. So we are very steadfast that this project is moving forward, but I would agree with the town board that, the Shinnecock Nation and our officials, we are more than willing to sit down and have more conversations about how we can work in partnership and how we can help you just garner more understanding of what this project absolutely means to the Shinnecock Nation and to our people.
And Bryan, we're talking about spring of 2025 potentially being an opening date. This thing is moving fairly quickly, right?